Okay, this is about Noah's flood. This is part one, and it's Genesis chapter 6 is what we're looking at today. So, looking at Noah's flood, we will be beginning in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, which tells us that the sons of God marries the daughters of men. And there are different views as to who these sons of God were. First of all, it would appear that these sons of God were angelic beings. And we read in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an example unto those that after should live ungodly, and delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them in seeing and hearing vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds." It can also be seen in Jude verse 6, that it is speaking of angels. And that says, "And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of that great day, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities like about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire." And then we have the Septuagint translations of Genesis 6:2, which says angels of God. So the most likely view that is correct in Genesis 6:4 is that certain angels had taken form of humans, trying to produce a race of superhuman beings that would not be conquerable and would be immoral. So God reminded his people that they were mortal and were kept alive by his Holy Spirit that is within them. And this is referred to in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 19 through 20, and by Jude in Jude 1, verse 6. And then let's look at 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 5. And it states, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them to chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the ungodly." However, there are other views, and the next best view is that Jesus taught in Matthew 22:30 that the angels don't marry. Also see Mark 12, verse 25. This view teaches that the daughters of men and the sons of God came from two different families. And this view teaches that the sons of God are from the descendants of Seth, while the daughters of men are from the line of Cain. With Seth, when Seth was born, Genesis 4, verse 26 tells us that men begin to call upon the name of the Lord. And then there are many other references similar to this in the Old Testament. There's also many references like this in the New Testament. For one, look at Romans 8, verse 14. It says, "For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God." And here we have the line of Cain as those that rejected the one Lord, and the line of Seth that followed the Lord. As these two groups commingled with each other, the line of Seth became increasingly like the line of Cain. They were unequally yoked with unbelievers of Cain's family, and you could look at 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14 for more information on that. And throughout the Old and New Testament, we see prohibitions for God's people marrying those who are not people of God. The immorality of those mentioned in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4 is grounds enough for the flood. And then in Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 through 7, we see God's plan to judge the world. In Genesis 6:5, we're told that, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So this is reason enough for God to take action against all this evil. Then we're told in Genesis 6:6 that it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. The just punishment for this evil is stated in Genesis 7:7, and the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But then again in Genesis 6:8, we see that Noah found grace in the eyes of God. In Genesis 9 through 12, we see that Noah was righteous, blameless, and walked with God. Being righteous, Noah was blameless before God. Being blameless, Noah was without any moral or ethical blemish. And then Psalms 15, verses 1 through 2, tells us that a psalm of David, Lord, who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? He that walketh uprightly and worketh righteousness and speaketh the truth in his heart. So it can be seen that Noah fits this description. And with all mankind being evil in the days mentioned about the flood, we can see that mankind had corrupted their way and had transgressed the grounds that God had established at creation. One can also see this type of evil and violence in Romans chapter 1, verses 26 through 32. And God gave up on them and gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. So God now saw that every inclination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil. And then in Genesis 6, verses 14 through 12, we find the dimensions of the ark are given. And notice that in verse 21, I said 14 through 12, it's 14 through 21. And notice in verse 21, it says that Noah is also to gather all food that will be for him and the animals. And then in Genesis 6, 19 through 20, God instructed Noah to take 2 of every sort of animal into the ark, while the other animals would be wiped out. God would now restart everything on earth, getting rid of all the disobedient people of the world. And God will do this again at the end of the 7-year tribulation. God would preserve each species through the 2 that would go into the ark. Was that all that would go into the ark? Just 2 species? No. As we continue on in chapter 7, verses 2 and 3, it states that of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s, the male and his female, and of the beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female. And of fowls of the air also, of the air, let me start over in verse 3. Of fowls also of the air by 7s, and the male and the female, to keep the seed alive upon the face of all the earth. So the Bible tells us that there are more than just 2 of each. The difference between clean and unclean beast is described in Leviticus chapter 11, verses 1 through 47, and Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 1 through 21. So Noah was to take 7 of the clean beasts, 3 male and female, and one odd that made 7. So the odd one was for them to make sacrifices to God, as seen in Genesis 8, chapter 8, verse 20. After that they had gotten off of the ark, and Noah builded an article unto the Lord, and took every clean beast and the fowl of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings unto the altar. I thank you for listening.